Hello and welcome to the Survive and Thrive podcast with Seed Eating Disorder Support Services and the wonderful Sarah Mulindwa. Round of applause.
Thank you for having me.
A lovely intro, but I'm going to have to read it because you've done so much, Sarah, that I can't quite digest it and remember it, even though I'm an actor by trade. So, but it's wonderful. So
I won't judge.
An official announcement. TV personality Sarah Mulindwa is best known as the witty and glamorous nurse and presenter on Channel 4's hit show The Sex Clinic. Through her background as a specialist nurse for over 10 years, she is part of a team of experts who cut through Britain's sex secrets. Beware. She not only teaches people about sexual health, but encourages them to talk about issues around relationships, identity, and body. Yes. With a background as a radio presenter, she also contributed to stations such as Talk Radio, Fairbar Radio, and BBC Radio London, discussing various topics. Having created a unique and diverse career, Sarah is also known in the creative industry as a fashion influencer, teething, radio personality, and has carved a successful career as a well-respected stylist, fashion editor and published writer. Her work has seen her in publications such as Vogue, the New York Times and Grazia, amongst others. Her exceptional skill sets have enabled her to make her mark across the board in health, fashion, TV and radio. I mean, hello, Superwoman. How are you doing?
Gemma, this is going to be so hard to live up to now.
Exactly. Like, we know each other, and I know you're like a phenomenal, like, brilliant woman who has done so much. But like, when I got, when you get like the official bio through, and you go, all right. So I am. So,
when did you sleep?
I know. When did you sleep?
I don't.
No, I get you.
I don't negotiate on sleep. I do like my sleep. I'm not gonna lie.
Maybe after this podcast, you need to talk to me and give me a good telling off about how much more sleep I need to get.
Gemma, I'm a very big sleep advocate for sure, so I will be telling you off.
All consuming at the moment, but it matters, and I guess that's why, you know, sometimes rest doesn't really factor when you're starting to look at the bigger picture. And I think what's really important for me with you coming on is that the series so far has been with those with lived experience, in terms of those who have suffered, come out the other side, or actually, in all honesty, are still on their recovery journey now. So what was really exciting for me was to speak to somebody from the other side about what it's like for you as a specialist nurse, and what you see in the hospitals, and, you know, how the culture is for you at the moment around the support for eating disorders. So I guess starting from the beginning, even though you're not coming from a place of like lived experience, growing up, what was it like for you around food and meal times and body image? Was that a discussion that was had much, like, in terms of your childhood and upbringing?
No, I think when I was growing up, it wasn't really a thing about, you know, we'd never really discussed body image issues and things. You just kind of, you know, I was a teenager in, when I was I'm going to show my age now, in like late 90s, early noughties. Yeah, and so I sort of grew up around an era pre-social media.
Yeah.
So although, yes, we had sort of magazines and TV and, you know, certain body types, as we know, that continue to this day to be pushed in certain ways. But growing up, the conversation about, you know, your self-image and your body, and especially as you grow and as you change as a teenager, things like hormones and puberty and periods, and just how you view yourself, those conversations were never really had. And so growing up, just like all young people, you know, I had my own, you know, body insecurities and things, whether it was something like, I don't know, stretch marks from when you're a teenager and your body starts to develop and change, and you grow breasts and hips and things, and you start to develop these things. And I remember when I was maybe like 13, 14, I remember I started getting, my breasts started to grow, and I started to get like some stretch marks on them. And I just thought it was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And it's something that I never really spoke to anybody about, because nobody really spoke about bodies, things. And so I just thought it was just this super weird thing that happened on my body. And I was like, what are these? And I didn't like them. And and so for a long time, I just kind of like would buy all these creams to try and, like, you know, reduce them and things like that. But I mean, looking at them now, they're completely not even a big deal. But when you were young and your body's changing and no one explains these changes to you, you think, oh my God, what is this?
Yeah.
You know, so growing up, no, those conversations were not really had. And so you can sort of see how, and even just relating to, like I said, I didn't grow up around sort of social media and have those pressures, but I still felt, you know, those kind of pressures that we all feel through society for various different reasons. But so I can only imagine what it would be like now.
Yeah. Oh God, it's a different ball game, isn't it? But sort of to ask in terms of from your cultural background, I know we can't say BAME anymore now, can we? I don't know what the official title is anymore.
Yeah, I think maybe Black and minority groups.
So,
but I think BAME is quite I mean, it doesn't really bother me, but I know it does bother some people. So I think Black and minority.
Yeah, last week it came out that we're not allowed to use that anymore. But anyway, you know what I mean in terms of your cultural background. One of the things that's been highlighted in eating disorders, especially, is that whatever we're meant to call the BAME community now, forgive me, apologies for getting it wrong if I do. Or for not addressing it properly. But a lot of the statistics say that culturally they struggle more with eating disorders. But it's interesting what you said about it not being discussed. Is that something you think specifically to your ethnic background, or do you think that's just something that has come about in terms of, I don't know, the different areas of the world where there's more of a predominant ethnic, like, do you know what I'm saying?
For sure, yeah. I think within the Black and minority ethnic groups, things like body issues have never really been, of all the different things we can talk about, you know, sex or mental health and things like that. Those are things that, yes, do get touched on. But when it comes to body image, that's really never really discussed. And I think historically, the sort of curvier body types has always been celebrated in, let's say, Black African culture.
Yeah.
And, you know, having bigger bum, bigger hips and things like that. These have always been the body types that have historically been celebrated. And so the concept of somebody not, you know, being secure and perhaps not wanting that body type and having other body issues, whether it's they don't, you know, align to that specific body type of the curvier body, or maybe being thinner, because, you know, if you've grown up in a society, whether you're, you know, a Black or minority person, if you've grown up in Western society, your concept of beauty might be different. And so what we find is that because historically it's not seen as sort of like a Black thing in terms of, you know, eating disorders, it's something that it goes unaddressed, because what we don't realize is that now, you know, Black Africans, Caribbeans and other ethnic groups that live in Western society in the diaspora, where the beauty standards are different and there is pressure to look a certain way. And so what we find is that we don't really target these groups because it's not really seen, those conversations are not had, because again, it's just never seen as a thing. It's kind of more seen as a Western issue. And so what we find is that eating disorders do develop. They develop in all races, all nationalities, all ages. It can affect you at any point in life. It's not something that necessarily, you know, can affect you from when you're young, although we do see it a lot, you know, we see those signs a lot younger. But it's something that can affect anybody from any background. And so knowing this, we sort of need to move forward in, you know, being inclusive and tailoring and targeting different ethnic groups and making it normalized conversations around bodies, around food, because it's something that does affect everybody. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And to your point, like this, the longer somebody goes without talking about it, i.e. if it's not something that is discussed, the longer something gets to develop without early intervention, which is so key when it comes to eating disorders.
Absolutely. Preventative measures are key when it comes to eating disorders, because oftentimes the early warning signs are there, but we may not always see them. So by opening up the conversation and, you know, for example, the toolkit that you provide at Seed, and, you know, having that accessible to teachers and, you know, parents, children at school level is super important. It's literally life-saving toolkit to have, because it can really show you signs and symptoms of somebody that may be, you know, vulnerable to an eating disorder. And so parents, teachers can sort of, you know, clock that and be able to intervene earlier on, because the earlier the better. Oftentimes when somebody goes through something internally without having any sort of outlet or, you know, anyone to talk to, then the harder it is, you know, as things progress to sort of reverse those effects. So early intervention is crucial when it comes to eating disorders.
And just touching on our, so Sarah, if you're watching this and you don't know about the Eating Disorder Educational Toolkit, Sarah's seen our schools resource, and I'm smiling because Sarah gave it the seal of approval, and Mummy Marge Oaten,
oh, we love it, Mum.
The Eating Disorder Educational Toolkit was her brainchild, you know, like probably about 4 years ago. So when you watched it and reviewed it and looked at it, Mum was just like over the moon. So anybody watching this, like, please do, we'll put in the links to especially the free schools resource. Please do look at it and consider whether, you know, you're a parent or you know, or a young adult watching this, going to your school and saying, can this be taught in our school? And equally, if you're a teacher watching this, please consider, you know, because as you say, Sarah, early intervention education is so key. So going back to you then, like, what prompted you to want to go into nursing? And forgive me if I'm sort of generalizing it, but like a medical sort of career path. What was that prompted you to do that?
Yeah, I've always been a people person, and I've always been quite inquisitive, and then I was good at science in school. And yeah, I just really, you know, was interested in the human body. One of my uncles was a doctor, my auntie was a nurse,
Wow.
my grandmother was a nurse and a midwife, and my mum's a nurse. And so I come from this quite sort of medical background. And yeah, for me, it always felt like a natural career path to go into. I've always, you know, felt like a caring person, and I've always, you know, wanted to kind of look after people. I used to pretend to be a nurse when I was younger. My dad, so he'd named me after my grandmother. Her name was Sarah, and she was a nurse and a midwife. So for him, it was like a dream come true when I said I wanted to be a nurse. And so I think that was kind of the connection there as well. And I was 17 when I went to university. Yeah, so I went a little bit early. And yeah, I never had any sort of other career goals other than wanting to be a nurse. Yeah.
It must be such a rewarding profession, but also a very difficult one at times as well. I mean, have you had experience of seeing any sort of eating disorder sufferers coming to the hospitals that you've worked in, or had first-hand experience of seeing any of that? Like, I know that it's, I mean, look, let's just say it as it is. We're filming this the week after we lost the beautiful Nikki Graham, and as we know, there's a lot of gaps in the system, shall we say, to not sort of point fingers, because I don't want to do that, but I think we do need to acknowledge that it's not a well-oiled ship, is it, Sarah?
It really isn't.
You know, so speaking to you this week, especially after what's just happened, I just wondered how it has been for you, if you've ever come across those who need that help with an eating disorder, but also what it's like for you as a healthcare professional as well, really.
Yeah, so a bit of background from my sort of nursing. So I've been a nurse for 14 years now, and I specialise in sexual health and HIV. And before that, my background was in acute medicine. So acute medicine is where, say you're admitted to hospital, you present to A&E, and then from A&E, whilst you're acutely unwell, you're transferred to the acute medical unit, where you're sort of stabilised, we figure out a plan, and then you're moved on to a ward rather, where you sort of would stay for the remainder of your hospital stay. So acute medicine is known for being quite a busy, quite high speed environment. We see people when they're acutely unwell, and so for 5 years that was my the beginning of my nursing career, where I started. And so within acute medicine, it was quite often that we would get, and unfortunately, because of where I worked, when we get patients who are admitting acutely unwell with eating disorders, it will usually be sort of, you know, at a crisis point where their bodies are beginning to shut down, where they're super dehydrated, where they've got no energy, and you see really at the worst case scenario where, you know, their life is really on the brink. And I remember one time. I had a young patient, and I believe she was 27, and I was around not that much older or younger than her.
Yeah.
And she was so lovely. She would come in, she would be admitted in every so often. She was in and out of rehab with eating disorder. She'd been suffering from it since she was about 4 years old. So throughout her pretty much entire life, and she'd been battling. So she was one of our regular patients that would, unfortunately, you know, she would be admitted every now and then. So we knew her really well, and we knew her journey and things. So for about 3 or 4 years, I sort of knew her through being admitted, and you kind of build this relationship. And I remember every time she would come in, she might be admitted maybe twice a year. Yeah. And I remember every time I'd see her, I'd kind of just be like, oh, you know, because you just know the last time I would have seen her, she was going to rehab and things were kind of getting better, and then she'd relapse, and then she'd come back in with her parents, and then, you know, the mental health team, and then we'll go through the process again of, you know, rehabilitating her and getting her back in the community, getting her fit, and, you know, trying to feed her as much as we could. And, you know, so I've seen sort of how bad things can really get. And unfortunately, she did pass away when she was 27. And that was about 3-4 years after I'd sort of known her and I'd nursed her, you know, built this relationship. And I remember finding it really hard because I remember thinking, God, you're no age, you know, and there was nothing, you know, you just feel really helpless. And, you know, as a nurse, you have, you know, on a shift, you can have 6 to 12 patients a day. And, you know, you do everything that you can for all your patients, of course, as you can as a nurse, but eventually you have to go home. Eventually you're, you know, it's the weekend, you've got the weekend off, you've got your annual leave. And so you kind of feel this, you know, I felt really maternal towards her. And of course, at some point, it's only a 12-hour shift. So I'll go a few days, and then, you know, sometimes I come back and she wasn't admitted and she'd gone. And then I'd wonder, you know, was she okay? And then I'd read up to make sure that, okay, yeah, she's gone back home and she's gone back to rehab. And so, yeah, for me clinically, and this is why I was so, you know, so incredibly honored when you asked me to sort of be a part of SEED, because I've seen how, you know, how bad things can get and what a terrible mental health disorder it is. And I've seen how we, you know, the gaps in the market and the gaps in the system where we are failing a lot of eating disorder patients, and we are seeing an increase. And, you know, there's things like budget cuts and things, you know, that obviously affect funding, and which or automatically affect resources. But we're in the middle of a crisis at the end of the day, we are, and especially off the back of a virus, you know, the effects of a virus, even coming out of lockdown. I mean, it's great. Just before we started recording, we were saying how lovely it is and the sun's out and like life is starting to feel a bit normal again, you know. Yeah. But if you look back historically, anytime we've gone through things like this, you know, as a human race, you know, it sometimes can take a year to even 3 years to see the real mental effects of being locked down, of isolation, of being on your own, of having, you know, your relationship with food be tested. And so now I think, and like we said, prevention is better than cure. And so now as people are starting to get back into society, this is the pivotal point to really put things in place for children that are going back to school, for teachers that are going back to school, and the issues that might come up. And this is the time to sort of to be more vigilant in you know, being aware, and you know, teachers having this tool to look out for signs and symptoms of children who may have been struggling during lockdown, because that is very much a real thing.
The Department for Education called it, they expect a tsunami of mental health issues after lockdown, and now, you know, time and time again, been reading a lot of the press this week around Nikki's story, and obviously I've done a lot of interviews, but saying that eating disorders are becoming a pandemic in themselves. So I mean, you touched on there about, we asked you to come and work with us. So yes, Sarah is our new health ambassador, which is just amazing, and we're so proud and privileged to have you on the team, because, you know, it's your level of the level of respect and understanding and knowledge and everything, but also being brave in terms of going, I work in the system and I see this, and it's not there yet, and it's not good enough. And I think the more voices we can get like that, the better, because what I don't want to do is, like, I know it's difficult, Sarah, like you say, you know, you're there in a capacity as a nurse to do a job for X, Y, and Z, but also you're not there as a therapist. So I think, like, what's really important is we start to look at how, I say we, you know, the powers that be, but equally we can start a conversation how to look at well, if somebody is in hospital, it's so important that each day somebody comes in to look over their mental health side while you look after the medical risk. It's things like that where you sort of go, then you can go home, Sarah, and have the peace of mind that you know that your patient has been just spoken to today.
It's a holistic approach, isn't it, to the whole to the whole issue. It's not of course, yes, we're there to, if somebody comes in and their potassium levels are dropped, their sugar levels are dropped, and they need blood transfusions, they need fluids, they need medication, antibiotics, they've got an infection. Yes, of course, we have to look over those, look after them from the physical perspective clinically, but also emotionally, mental health, we need more input therapy, and not just at that point where they'd miss this hospital. We need it when they go home, that continuous support, and having things put in place and spaces, where people can access help and get online help. We know how difficult it is to get an appointment, even with your GP, let alone waiting for, therapy. So it's these kind of things that are really holding us back, that we need to keep pushing forward, and we will get there, and we will. I genuinely do believe that, because you can't ignore a pandemic like this, and this is what it is. And this virus, as in coronavirus, has just amplified what was already pre-existing, and it's just sort of put it on a, it's just amplified what was already happening. So I think sometimes things have to get worse before they get better, and just as you said before, regarding Nikki's death, I met Nikki a couple of times. I think she was an ambassador for the Pink Ribbon Foundation that does breast cancer. And so we sort of met a couple of times, and she was just such a sweet girl, just super bubbly, exactly as you would expect her to be, how she was funny and just so full of life. And I remember when I heard the news, I was just so devastated. It reminded me, back again, with the patient I told you about. And that's the first thing that I thought. And I just thought, 38 years old, your whole life ahead of you, and you just think, no, we can't continue to, and then I was reading about the story and how she was finding it hard in lockdown. And for people with already existing eating disorder, already suffering from eating disorder, just imagine how lockdown would be. So now is so essential, and her passing won't be in vain, and a lot of positive change will come out of this, even just people talking about it and normalizing the conversation around food and how we look at food, how society, because eating disorders stem from different things, different factors taken into consideration when you think about somebody that suffers from an eating disorder. It can stem from all sorts of different things, but they are things that we can also make change in society. Things like social media, even there's conversations about filters, and now having to say that you put a filter on your image, things like that. And it seems something small, but actually these things are really important for young people, so that when they go online and they look at images, they can look at it and say, okay, well, yeah, this person looks like this, but actually they've used a filter. Actually, they're getting paid to say this, actually, and these are small things and small changes that we can push forward, for sure.
I think you're so right. Like we need to adapt and change to the world that's being presented to us. And I think there is a real duty of care from the Advertising Standards Agency to keep that moving forward and in the right direction. And you touched on as well, and I think this is why Seed was co-founded by Mum and Dad, like, about how it is hard to access help and it is hard to get a GP appointment. We know that. We're not sat here, but you and I sort of going, do this and do that. We know that it's not as easy as that. But I think that's why it's so important that people know that Seed is here. So we're a service that can bridge that gap. And hopefully, like I always say, the sooner somebody comes and reaches out to us, before it gets to a point where it's crisis level, hopefully the collective work that we do, you, I, Mum, Dad, our volunteers, we can help that person not even have to go on that waiting list, not even have to go down. So therefore, it saves money and it saves lives.
Absolutely.
You can't put a price on that. So I'm just, and you said about normalizing the conversation. I think that's so important, Sarah. And I've had a few people sort of say in the past, oh, well, by speaking about eating disorders, are you not triggering? And I was like, no, and eating disorder is not a choice.
This is it.
Anyway.
That's it. Right.
Yeah, we can brush it under the carpet as much as you want, but it's always going to be there. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. Absolutely. And you can't prevent that, and actually talking about it is how you do help to prevent that. Because if young people especially feel empowered and feel like they can speak about these issues that they feel, how they might feel insecure, then as adults we can then intervene and put things in place, and and support them and talk to them about maybe our issues and how we might have felt when they were that age, and that can normalize. Sometimes just talking about something that you might be feeling and hearing somebody else's experience, that alone can be such a massive help, because it can be, when you're going through something, especially on your own internally, mentally, it can feel so isolating. You can feel like you're the only person going through something. You can feel like nobody else can relate to you. But then when you open that conversation and you go online and you find communities and you find charities and you can talk to people who have been through it, who have lived through it, people's parents who have gone through it, it makes the situation, it really does make the situation a lot easier for people to deal with, and they can feel a lot more supported. And then, that preventative measure within, before it gets to that critical level, that's what the focus is on here, and that's what I hope to achieve.
Hopefully creating a safer space for the conversation as well. What's so what, like, now at the moment, what's your relationship like with yourself? I know you've never gone through an eating disorder, but as you touched on there about if we have conversations about real life, it might help other kids or 36-year-olds like me out there not to feel like, because we have completely this last year had to live our life through a screen, and like, as you say, it can be so hard to know what is normal and what's not. Hi, Ruby.
Sorry, oh, do we have a guest? Oh, wow.
Hello, darling. Hi, you can hear that dog barking outside. But, like, how is there any sort of, like, how are you with yourself at the moment? Like, do you have those days where you think, oh my God, and how do you combat that? And is there any advice you could give to other people who might be feeling pressure through social media? Because I think that would be really lovely to hear.
Yeah, no, I think, and this is what I say, and my job as I specialize in sexual health and HIV. So my job is talking to people every day about sort of their relationship, their sex lives, their body issues, and a lot of times people divulge information to me and about how they feel and what they're going through emotionally, psychologically. And so what I've come to realize, and this is why even with my patients, when I talk to my patients, I'm always trying to be as transparent as I can, and give them different perspective. And what I say is, no matter who you look at, especially on the internet, magazines, everybody has things that they battle through in terms of how they look themselves, in terms of any insecurity. So for me, I think at the moment I feel sort of okay in terms of my relationship with food, and I think also as you get older, it's been a journey. It's not been something that, I think for me, sort of body acceptance has for sure been a journey. I mean, I'm 35 now, and it's only really when I got into my 30s that I've started to say, do you know what, this is my body. It's served me really well. It's kept me healthy. There's nothing really wrong with it. Like, it's fine the way it is. But, it's been a journey to get to that point of feeling like, oh, maybe I'm too skinny here. Maybe I'm not curvy enough. And then you see all these different body things. And I worked in fashion as well. So I've seen, and that's the interesting thing, because I think for me, having worked in fashion, I worked as a stylist. And so I've seen within the fashion industry, I've had models literally crying to me because they couldn't fit into a sample size, or designers maybe making comments that were less than desirable about maybe how somebody could have looked. And so I've seen how the pressure and how we still have a lot of work to do in terms of changing, having body diversity and normalizing body types, and saying actually no human being looks exactly the same. So for me, with my body, sort of how I would cope with sort of staying away from anything that makes me insecure. What I'd find, sometimes I'd be following people on social media who like look great all the time, always look perfect. And then after I think to myself, actually, this just, it doesn't make me feel very good about myself. And then I'll start comparing my body, and then I'll think, oh, well, maybe if I was a little bit, curvier here, or maybe if I was a bit smaller there. And then what I've started to do is just deleting and unfollowing people that I just they don't really care what they're doing with their lives. Yeah, because I'm like, it's not serving me any good. I'm not learning anything. And it's actually just making me a little bit insecure about my own body. And so that's why I always tell people, just filter your social media. There's so much out there, but you can actually tailor it to just people that you want to follow and people that uplift you and give you positive energy and don't bring out insecurity in you. So that would be my biggest tip.
Absolutely. And I think that's starting to happen more and more, isn't it, babe? Like,
for sure.
There's people are starting to sort of suggest people to go and follow that are inspiring for different reasons than what has sometimes been the norm. And I think that's really important. I mean, you know, like for me, God, I'm 36, and people say, oh, would you ever consider playing a Bond girl in a sexy role? And I'm like, have you seen me? Like, no. But I kind of accepted that I'm never going to be that big boobed, like Kardashian type. I'm always going to look like, I know people say I look younger than I am, but I'm always going to look like that because I've got a small frame.
Because that's it. That's your body type.
And that's fine by me, like, of course, like, I want to feel nice sometimes. And I think that raises a point at the moment where, I don't know about you, Sarah, but because I've been so used to like literally living in sweatpants,
leggings, hoodies.
I mean, I'm still wearing a hoodie now, even though it's supposed to be. Get your merchandise, watch the space.
That's it.
But I literally have lived my life like that. And then I went out for a meal last night and I was like, what do I wear? And like,
I know, right?
I'm
like, how do I get dressed? What fits? What's in style now? Like, how do you put an outfit together?
And I was like, what do I do with this? And then I started thinking, oh, do you know what? I honestly, Sarah, I started thinking, maybe I work.
Yeah, right. Social anxiety. Like, I'm not. For ages, we were all like, oh, can't wait to get. Now I'm like, oh God, the thought of getting dressed, then I have to do my hair, then makeup, and it just seems like such a big task now. I'm just so used to being in my dressing gown all day.
Yeah,
and wearing, like, getting dressed between here and here.
I did when I did go swimming a couple of weeks ago. I did that with my dress and I had my pajama bottoms on underneath.
Oh yeah.
But honestly, though, it's like when you feel that pressure, it gets even harder to go out. So I guess like what you're saying is focus on the people that give you the good energy and focus on the role models that inspire and allow you to be you. I don't know about you, but I love Patterson's Instagram.
She's brilliant.
Because she does
so relatable.
She does a job, and then you see another post, like where she's doing her like adverts or whatever, and she has to post different things for different people. And then the next thing, she's in bed, stuffing her face with a burger and going, and I just love that. And like Scarlett Moffat and just all of these incredible young women who are just going, this is me, and it's
is me. Exactly. And I think that transparency is so important, and especially people who are on social media and as influencers or celebrities. We want the people who are going to be real and show us the different elements of life that I can be with makeup and do that, but really we all just live in leggings and joggers and no makeup on and just looking a mess. And having that transparency, I think, is so important. Have
you got any advice speaking about sort of, we at Seed and myself personally have had a lot of people who are suffering from eating disorders coming to us and saying that they had to adapt to being locked away, but now they're like we talked about, having to adapt to going out. But aside from anybody who's suffering from an eating disorder, anybody who is suffering with anxiety about getting back out in the real world, my bit of advice has been to them, you do you, and you take it at your pace. If you've got any sort of advice that you could give to anybody, I mean, that might help and support and encourage.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on what you just said with your advice, absolutely. Just because they say, okay, this is when lockdown's going to be lifted and you're allowed back. You don't have to be. I mean, I went out briefly on the weekend, and there was a lot of things I was invited to, but I was like, I'm just not ready to go out yet. I'm kind of just in my little phase. Like, when I'm ready, I'll slowly get it back in society. So let's not give each other deadlines. And I think now at the moment, there's this thing of like the 21st. I remember I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine the other day, and she's really becoming anxious about the 21st of June because she's like, I put on so much weight during lockdown that June is not that far and I don't think I could reach my target. And we sat and spoke about it for ages, and I said, look, who cares? Like, we've all put on weight in lockdown. Nobody cares. Like, if anything, this is time to celebrate the fact that we have made it through this horrendous year, and we've all like suffered immensely, whether it's emotional, psychologically, financially. That how you're feeling is how we're all feeling. So people who are going through, and she said that to me, and I said, oh my God, I'm feeling anxious about getting back out. I don't want to see people. Like, I'm not ready to dress up, and like I want to sort of get fit, because one of my goals in lockdown was like I was going to do like all these squats, and I was going to get toned in lockdown. None of that. Absolutely none of that. And so now, you know, with his, you know, the lockdown lift has started, and I'm like, so I achieved one of my goals. But you know what? I don't care, because I'm so just grateful to be alive. Like, we've made it through a horrendous year. So I think, guys, let's just put things into perspective. You know, our bodies change all the time. But our life is so precious, and to still have it after all this year, that is worth celebrating, no matter how. And don't let anybody tell you that, you know, there's a deadline to look a certain way. There's no one way to look. We're all different, and that's what makes us beautiful.
I think on that note, that is the conclusion of this podcast, because I don't want to end on any other. That's amazing, Sarah. Thank you so much. Is there
thank you so much, Gemma.
Anywhere that our viewers can sort of follow you? I mean, we'll put all your socials up, but is there anything coming up for you? I know it's hard in lockdown in COVID world, but is there anything coming up for you that people should look out for, or is there anything that you'd like to share for people to watch this space with?
Yes, I've got a few things that I'm working on. Something coming up with a. So it's been a very busy couple of weeks. A few things that I can't say just yet, but do look out on my Instagram, and I'll be making a few announcements in the next couple of weeks. Something with a social media platform that we sort of doing that's going to be hopefully a platform to learn. So I've done something there with Channel 4 that you guys will hopefully like. That'll be out in a couple of weeks. And I'm actually just super looking forward to working with Seed. I've got so many ideas and so many conversations that I want to start around food, around eating disorders, about body identity, about any sort of emotional and mental health things that affect our relationship with food. So those are the two things that I'm really looking forward to working on at the moment, and a few other brand collaborations that I'm doing. I've started working with a drinks brand that's super good, that has loads of vitamins and minerals and like packed with great stuff. So that's a new thing that I'm working on. But yeah, everything's on my Instagram. So yeah, we can all stay in touch via there.
Oh, Superwoman, I love you. Thank you.
So love you, Gemma. Say hi to Mum for me.
And we'll see you Mum's going to give you the biggest hug.
Oh, I cannot wait to see her.
And I can't wait to give you a big hug soon too.
Same, my darling. Thank you so much.
You're amazing. Bye.
Bye.